There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UU Virtual Roundtable. My name is Sarah, and I'm going to be today's moderator. Here's a couple of things to remember before we begin. So we're going to be having a slideshow beforehand for about 30 minutes. So during the slideshow, please mute yourself, and we'll have a Q&A discussion afterwards. And we will also be uploading this session onto our YouTube channel, which will be available tomorrow. So those two things. And today we have Michael Ray from the American Indian Program at NMSU. And go ahead, you can take over.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Michael Ray. I'm from the American Indian Program at New Mexico State University. And let me just queue up my PowerPoint, which surprisingly disappeared for the moment. But I guess it's just the chalking it up to Murphy's Law when it comes to technology.
Seems to be one of those days today.
Okay. Here we go. And now, here we go. So the title of the presentation that I usually put on is called Creating a Community Away from Home Community here at New Mexico State University. But we know this kind of goes into our other areas when it comes to the greater Las Cruces community as well. So as mentioned, my name is Michael Ray. I'm the director of the American Indian Program. Currently, we're under the Office of the Chancellor in the Office of Strategic Initiatives area. So that's where our area is located when it comes to the university relations. So when I bring up our presentation, I often ask, what is a Native American? This is one of those things that has been a topic of conversation for quite some time. And also when it comes to that, what is the differences between the various terminologies? So when I bring that up, I usually bring up that classical Webster's dictionary definition of a member of any of the Aboriginal peoples of the Western Hemisphere, especially a Native American of North America, and especially of the United States. And here it often brings up compare American Indian. So when it comes to that, we hear American Indian, we hear Native American. For our tribal communities up in the North, we may hear First Nations. For some, we may hear Indigenous. So those are all terms that can be used interjectively, but also one of the best things that we often talk about is asking a specific individual, how do they feel or how do they want to be represented? Some of our tribal communities will say, well, call us by our specific name. For like me, I'm from the Pueblo of Laguna. So when it comes to that, when I sometimes identify myself, I say I'm Kwaikano, Laguna people. So we go through that process. Or for those who are part of the Navajo Nation, they may say I'm Navajo, or they may say I'm Dene, which is that masculine form of Navajo. Now, there is a feminine form of that, which women will often say, but it's one of those things that is often in debate when it comes to how people identify, how people go through, and also it's one of those, it's very individual when it comes to how people are going to be doing this. So this is where I bring up that interactive portion, or at least that generational quiz when it comes to our area. So does anybody by chance know who this would be? And just for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and bring that up when it comes to Iron Eyes Cody. And I put that in quotation marks because that is the stage name of the gentleman by the name of Esper Oscar de Corti, who was an Italian gentleman. So if any of you have watched the movie Real Indians, he talks about Indians and Native Americans in film and television. And he is one of those gentlemen who built his career portraying Native Americans. He was a part of the America the Beautiful campaign that was a part of the Environmental Protection Agency way back in the 60s, 70s area. So this is one of those ones where he created his persona, he created his entire career based upon portraying Native Americans and through his acting career. This one in particular, this is the painting, I Am Crow, by artist Kirby Sadler. Now, Kirby Sadler is one of those artists that, on his website, he will definitely portray and say, I am not a I'm not an ethnohistorian. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a, I am an artist, and I would depict Native Americans in a way that is more profitable towards or more suitable towards my consumers. So I bring this one up because, as you can see, it has very striking resemblance towards the latest incarnation of Tonto in the Lone Ranger and Tonto film. Johnny Depp was being portrayed in this in quite the same garb. And this is again where not a historical reference is being used as popular culture to depict Native Americans. And when it comes to the generational quiz, this is where most of my students have that opportunity to say, oh, okay, yes, I know who this person is. So when it comes to that, this is Disney Animation's Pocahontas. And I often bring up when it comes to asking students, using this picture alone, how old do you believe this woman is? People will say 18, they'll say 20, 23. And again, this is the depiction that Disney Animation decided to do. Well, in fact, Pocahontas was an actual real girl. She was Powhatan Pamunkey tribe up from the Northeast. And her actual age was more around 12 years old. So I try and go ahead and say, now imagine that entire movie, but with a 12-year-old. Think of your relatives, your cousins, your nieces, your daughters, whatever it might be. And this is that story that is being told. Now, as we go into the deeper story of the history of Pocahontas, she was taken to the New World under the tamed savage era of portraying Native Americans back in England, and unfortunately passed away on her way back. And this is one of those types of, we don't know the full story. I don't think we'll ever know the full story. But when it comes into the realm of things that have been going on in most recently, when it comes to our missing and murdered Indigenous women, this is one of those things that have not necessarily been going on for decades, but by chance been going on for centuries. But this also goes into the murdered and missing Indigenous men realm as well, being that we often have our First Nations family up north to the north, where the police will take Native American men on what's called moonlight strolls, and will often, handcuff them in the forest and leave them there. Ultimately, it is one of those difficult situations where this still to this day happens. And the main reason, I often talk to students about this is, so why do I bring this up? And when it comes to that, I bring in the common thread of all of those images. And what it really brings it down to is that popular culture has done a really poor job of informing us about Native Americans and Native American history. So when I bring this up, I talk about the unconscious incompetence that we all have. For you who have gone through the university system, that psychology class we all at once had, you remember the 4 or 5 stages of competency. And this is just that unconscious incompetence that we all have by virtue of maybe sometimes our implicit bias of where we learned about Native Americans, how Native Americans were taught to us, and in what light. So this is where we still have that opportunity to take a look about how are we viewing different cultures. And that's where I bring that up, is that how has this been done with other cultures? The most recent one that I've been bringing up is the notion of Cinco de Mayo. Now, Cinco de Mayo is one of those, in the United States, we've been celebrating it for quite some time. But actually, what is Cinco de Mayo? Most people will say, well, isn't that Mexican Independence Day? Well, unfortunately, it's not, being that it's in a couple of days when Mexican Independence Day is coming up. But this is the Battle of Puebla when it comes to the French army, the French army going against the Mexican army when France was trying to take over Mexico from Spain. Now, the Battle of Puebla was one of those where General Zaragoza was able to defeat that French army with not as much soldiers. This was one of those battles that they never thought they would have won. So there was that historic event, and that's what was going on when it comes to May 5th. Now, where do we hear about this in our current popular culture? Where do we hear about this when it comes to May 5th? We really don't hear that much about it, but we often hear about come get a margarita, come get some tacos, come, whatever this celebration or this, popular culturalized version of what that significant event is. But we often hear this when it comes to St. Patrick's Day. We often hear this when it comes to Chinese New Year. We often hear about this when it comes to a whole host of other American holidays that have roots in actual history, but we've popular culturalized them to a certain respect in that that history is lost in many places. So that's a little bit about what we've been trying to do when it comes to talking about community, bringing up that little bit of history, but also we often talk about creating that community away from community in our campus, being that we not only serve our Native American students, American Indian students, we serve the whole student population. So any of our students who are on campus can utilize our services no matter what range they're at. So this is all the way from our dual credit students who are at some of our local high schools, all the way to our PhD students, postdoc students who are going to be on campus or still going through their educational journey. So when we talk about that, here's our mission statement, our vision statement, and our purpose statement. Now, I'm sure you all can read those a lot faster than I can talk. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that up to you for that. But I know it'll also be on the video. So if there's going to be an option to do a pause or whatever it might be, you can definitely do that. So the American Indian program staff is myself as our director and our administrative assistant, Ms. Brittany Stout. And together we're able to watch and look over our building, but also help serve our 638 Native American students that are enrolled at New Mexico State University, as well as any student who comes through our building or through our area or has questions for us. Now, as mentioned in the background that I have, this is the American Indian Student Center. The American Indian Student Center was built around 2009 and completed and had our grand opening on October 10th, 2010. So we are coming up to our 10th year anniversary when it comes to how long we have been in this building. So this is something that we are going to be celebrating in a very different way this year, being that everybody is looking more towards the socially distant public safety mindedness. And we're also going to be doing some YouTube videos when it comes to talking to our previous directors of the American Indian program, students, alumni, and those who have benefited from the services of being at the American Indian Student Center. Now, just to give a little visual view, because I know when people see the building, they see the outside of the building, but maybe they might not have been able to see the inside of the building. And of course, I always put that little bit of snow, especially for our students who come from other states or in the north, to let them know, yes, we get snow down here. It's not just unbearably hot all the time. But I always tell them, you'll get used to the heat and you'll miss it sometimes. So this is our commons area. Now, we have socially distanced our computers, so that way students can utilize them in a safe manner. We've also done that with our couches and our chairs over there. But this is that non-academic area for students who want to utilize the computer for, say, their email, checking YouTube, doing Facebook things, that non-academic area, because we all know students are going to need that outlet when it comes to trying to figure out, what's going on back home, trying to create that sense of a virtual community while they're here on our campus as well. And this is our study room. So we've also limited the number of students that is available to utilize it, making sure that we're staying within our guidelines. But this is that area where students can utilize it for that academic purpose. So we wanted to make sure that if there was an area for non-academic, there was going to be an area for academic. Because I remember when I was going through my studies quite some time ago, there was that time when you're working on an essay, you're typing away, and then you see somebody next to you and they're maybe watching a funny cat video. And you go, hey, you start doing this a little bit more. And sooner enough, you get in this 3-hour wormhole that is YouTube, or trying to remember what it was way back when, Rooster Teeth or Machinima when it comes to those online videos. But this is that place where students can, if they had group work, utilize the tables to spread out their work. If they're typing, if they're doing research, if they're doing stuff like that way, to definitely focus towards that quiet study room area. And now this is our North Training Room. Now our North Training Room is utilized for those individuals who may be working on a presentation, getting the ums, uhs, wells, nows, cows out of their vocabulary. Because we remember when we were first going through our undergraduate year, the notion of a 5-minute presentation was like the longest, the most difficult thing that we ever had to do. But as much as we had the opportunity to do that, the easier it got. So we have that opportunity for students to, if they're practicing for a class, they can definitely utilize this area, bring some of their friends in, people who they're comfortable with, so that way they can go ahead and go through that process. But as you can see on the upper top area, we've also held the Indian Affairs Committee meetings through our New Mexico State, our New Mexico legislature. So this is one of those areas where we were able to house them in our area, have students be able to attend these sessions that they might not have been able to attend before, but also bring that sense of community, that state legislature, state Indian Affairs community onto our campus. Again, that sense of community, we're wanting to go that both ways, because we want community coming on to our university when it comes to our Native American community, outside community, whatever it might be, but also for those students, the community that they're developing and that they're showing. Down to the right, we had Ricardo Cate come on down and talk about his activism and cartoons that he's been able to do through the Santa Fe New Mexican, but also some of the things that he does also within his artwork. But also, it's a student space area where there are classes that are held in this room. Student organizations can utilize it for their student organizational meetings. So it's just one of those places where students can gather, have those times to talk with one another, be a part of that organization, to again, develop that sense of community. And this is the gallery area. This is just that hallway that unites all of those buildings or all of those rooms. And we wanted to make sure that it was a building, it was a area where students can see that little bit of home on our NMSU campus. So you'll see there's pottery, there's textiles, there's baskets, there's paintings. And this is where we wanted to recreate that sense of home. Because I know when I go home to the Pueblo of Laguna, my grandma, my auntie's home, there's pottery, there's baskets, there's textiles, there's paintings. You know, that sense of home is what we wanted to kind of recreate. Because if you look at any of our buildings here on our campus, they have a similar style when it comes to the white walls, when it comes to the architecture, but we wanted to make sure that students had that sense of belonging, because the more students feel that they belong on our campus, the better they're able to focus on their academics, the better they are to focus on interacting with one another, to develop those networks of alumni, those networks of community that they're gonna be seeing in the professional realm, national conferences, and all over the place. So the better they are when it comes to feeling that comfortable, that they don't have to worry about people asking, or I miss this, I miss home, or I can't wait till I get back. This is where we're able to help out when it comes to that sense of well-being. Now, this is our east building. So this is the administrative side. So this is where my office will be, where Ms. Stout's office will be. But we also have one of New Mexico State University's hidden secrets when it comes to our meditation room. Now, we bring this out when it comes to if students need a place to have that sense of quiet, that sense of well-being, do self-reflection, whatever it might be. This is one of those areas that can definitely do so. We know sometimes our dorms are not necessarily the most quietest of places, and that's one of those places where students sometimes seek refuge at, but we want to make sure that that's a place where students have that opportunity to do that self-reflecting, whether it be you're doing a great job, keep on going, persevere on through, but also if they just want that sense of well-being, of being in a room where all they have to worry about is the sound of the air conditioner and their thoughts. As you can see, we also have our library available for those individuals who are wanting some Native American focused reference material that maybe Zool or Branson may or may not have, but we also wanted to make sure that there was another option on our campus. You see our conference room is there for that socially distanced, for those students who are available to meet in person. And again, that human to human interaction can be a little bit good when it comes to the students feeling that at ease, but also it's one of those areas where if students wanted to also have a smaller meeting, they can definitely do so. But we also know that we have students who are away from us at the moment. So this is where we're able to utilize our Zoom services. And you can see, we have been, when it comes to keeping track of our numbers, and this is where we want to make sure that all of our students are represented in a respectful way, being that when it comes to our admissions documents, they only capture the tribal affiliation of 25 different tribal communities. But we know we have a vast majority more when it comes to our students who are from various countries, various states when it comes to our community. So we've had students come from Canada when it comes to Cree up in the Saskatchewan area. We've had students who have come from Nova Scotia when it comes to being Micmac. We've had students who come from Wisconsin, who are Oneida, Lumbee from North Carolina, Ipe from California. And we have all of these records because we have students who will sign on in and who are very proud of the community that they represent. Just a little bit about the services that we offer. We wanted to make sure that students have that opportunity to still work with some of their higher education departments back home when it comes to the faxing and scan and sends of documents back home. We also offer low cost, no cost printing. This is where we absorb the cost of that. We often have the students who have the $20 worth of printing on their Aggie IDs. And sometimes that just doesn't cut it with the amount of papers that are being produced by our students. So we wanted to make sure and have that opportunity where students can come utilize a printer. We have those events to bring community, but also that networking and path building when it comes to that cultural capital, that social capital that we hope to invest in our students and how to utilize resources across the campus. But not only that, as mentioning before, utilizing that network that they're going to be building and creating for the rest of their life. We also, when it comes to that, have a peer mentor program. Now, this is designed to help out with that social capital of students helping out students when it comes to the resources and experiences that they're going to be having as they enter New Mexico State University as a first-year freshman or as a transfer student. Because we know we get students from various levels, and even this goes into what we're looking at moving forward of helping graduate students as well if they come from another institution than our own. So the more the students have that opportunity to realize the resources that are on campus, but also to realize the community that is Las Cruces can better serve, better help when it comes to being able to navigate not only our campus, but the whole entire Las Cruces community. We do have 3 student organizations that are there when it comes to creating that sense of community. We have the ACES, American Indian Science and Engineering Society, which is a national organization. We have a local chapter here on our campus. We have our Native American Business Student Association, which is more affiliated with the ABLE, American Indian Business Leaders Association. And we have one that's uniquely ours when it comes to NMSU, and it's called the United Native American Organization, which is more of that community-based, community-building organization. Now, this is one that I'm really proud of and that our students have been able to come together and talk about some of the issues, some of the community building things that they have. Because if you look at some of our other institutions across the state, across the country, you may see separate clubs when it comes to a Dene club, a Kiowa club, a Pueblo club, an Apache club, so forth and so on. But our students have been able to all come together and talk about some of the things that they want to do when it comes to the community building, but also address some of the things that are going on in their home community that they want to work on as they all look to want to help one another again as they go through that network building. So some of the events that we're looking at when we do our stuff when we're on our campus, we have a welcome back. And this year we were able to put that on YouTube, being that we know sometimes as our students are in their home communities, the ability to be in another meeting at 5 o'clock in the evening sometimes just isn't there. They may have family opportunities that they have when it comes to, for those who have livestock, feeding the cows, feeding the goats, for those who may be coming together as a family to have dinner, that might be that time. And we didn't want to intrude upon that. So we tried to create an opportunity where it can be on demand, where students can utilize that when they have the time. So if students have that time at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's when they're more adapted to learn, that is something that they can definitely utilize. But we've also put this on our American Indian Program website, being that we know not everybody has the opportunity to stream when it comes to the digital divide that does happen in our state. So we wanted to make sure that there was a place where they can download a low resolution, lower bit content file. So that way when they do go into town or where they do go to a Wi-Fi spot where they're able to download stuff, they can do that for later usage. We are still looking at continuing our A Mountain hike and other hikes that we have going on, but making sure that we're socially distance minded of creating more opportunities, maybe a group of 5 starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, a group of another 5 starting at 9:30, another group starting at 10. That way you still have that ability to get to know one another, because a lot of talking happens while hiking, so students get to talk about their classes, about where they come from, but also those successes that they have that we want to highlight. So those are those opportunities that we're trying to bring when it comes to not only just being on campus, but to know that there's a lot more beyond our campus. So we've taken students over to Dripping Springs. We're looking at going to Slot Canyon. We're looking at going to Picacho Peak as those areas to reintroduce all the various areas that Las Cruces has to offer. Indigenous Peoples Day is another one that we're looking at when it comes to our program, our student organizations, and our Native American and ally faculty coming together to talk about some of the issues that are going on in our Native communities, but also addressing what is Indigenous Peoples Day? Where is it coming from? And what is it a response to? So this is where we're working with those entities to create different types of events that will be going on, which we'll be advertising at a later date. It's just that we're still trying to figure out what we can do in our digital space. We have our Native American market that our NAPSA organization usually puts on. And this is something that we're kind of doing on a day-by-day basis when it comes to the amount of people who can organize or attend an event. And this is the Native American market that usually would happen in November in Mesilla Plaza. But we're also looking at our Food for Thought and Finals Lunch and Speaking series, where students get the opportunity to talk about some of the research, poster presentations, and things that they do when it comes to their classes or student organizations. So this is that time where we want to highlight those students who are doing amazing things when it comes to the research projects that they're working on, or if they're working on things for, say, a student organization, as mentioned before. So to learn more about the happenings of the American Indian program, of course, we have our Facebook, we have our Instagram, being that we wanted to make sure and be in the realms that our students are. And we've now ventured into our website, our YouTube video series as well. So you can also search American Indian Program, NMSU, when it comes to YouTube. But that's some of the stuff we do on our campus. Now this is going into what we do in our communities. So in our communities, we work with our tribal education directors to create pathways to NMSU. So we'll go into some of our communities and do some of their events when it comes to school supply gatherings, or when it comes to bringing students onto our campus, so that way they get a sense of knowing, is this the community for me? Because that's one of the big things that we want our students to do, is come visit our campus as much as possible. So that way they get a sense of, is this for me? Because like it's mentioned before, we want those students having that sense of belonging, that sense of, I can be here for 4 years, or hopefully I can be here for 6 years and get that master's degree as well. We also work with our educational partners for transfer opportunities. So when it comes to that, we work directly sometimes with high schools. So Santa Fe Indian School, Native American Community Academy, the Albuquerque Public Schools, Indian Education Department. We also work with our tribal community colleges and community colleges around when it comes to Southwestern Indian Polytechnical Institute, San Juan College, Dene College, Navajo Technical University, and those are just a few to name. But we also work with tribal communities on how to bring students back, and many of those students who are culturally aware and culturally competent for jobs. So when it comes to that, we've been working with the All Pueblo Council of Governors when it comes to some of the events they've had, strategic doing sessions when it comes to the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, and working with my home community of the Pueblo Laguna when it comes to workforce development cross-sector meetings, when it comes to how are they or able to provide jobs for the students who will be coming in with a very diverse background when it comes to their majors. But we're also learning from our tribal communities and how we can create community on campus. You know, we know of our 23 Pueblo tribes and nations here in the state of New Mexico, but we also want to know more about our other 574 additional tribal communities who are across the state, across the country, but also into our international area. So back in 2009, I was able to attend a conference over in Hamilton, New Zealand, over at the University of Waikato, and we were able to also present over at the First Nations University of Canada and University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada, for some of their conferences as well. So this is where we're also learning as much as possible as we can when it comes to that sense of community. Because if I was just bringing my sense of community when it comes to the Pueblo Laguna, that means that it's only one particular way. But we also want to make sure that we're incorporating and encompassing as many tribal communities as possible, being that they're all completely unique and individual. But we're also working in direct support of communities. And this is where the Universal Unitarian Church was able to help out with when it comes to the community donations that came on in when it comes to the recent COVID-19 pandemic and the access issues we had in our tribal communities. So this was one of the first ones that we were able, I mean, this one of the first ones where we're able to take up, regular vehicles, help out when it comes to the young ones, when it comes to that need of diapers. Because as we know, in the state of New Mexico, McKinley County was one of those areas that was hardest hit when it comes to the COVID-19. And it wasn't necessarily in the community of Crown Point, but more so in the town of Grants. And this is where that access issues come on in, where most of the people who are in that community will have to resort to going to Grants, Gallup, Grants, or Farmington to get their regular needs for the entire week, or sometimes the entire month. So if we have the opportunity for individuals not to go into those communities of Grants, Farmington, and Gallup, that might just prevent that spread even more so. So if we were able to bring in community or, bring in goods, bring in items, so that way they didn't have to go out. That was one of the plans that we had. But we had such a response that we had to do a little bit more when it comes to filling up that trailer. There's some of it that was in there, but we were working with this amazing individual. Her name is Tracy Michelle, and she is the one that organized in her community the Crown Point COVID-19 Relief Fund. So with her working with community health representatives, we were able to do a lot more good in that community, being that if we were to have everything in a centralized location, we would only be scratching the surface of what could be done, because there's still those communities that are very rural, very remote. And if you pretty much have to be a part of the community to know which dirt roads to go down, which corners not to miss, because sometimes if you miss a turn, you miss an entire community. So this is where we were able to utilize the cultural knowledge of those individuals that are there. And Tracy and Michelle was able to help out when it comes to that, as she's a high school teacher at Crown Point High School. And this was her way of wanting to try and reach out, work with her community, not just in her professional capacity as an educator, but in that caring capacity as well. So when it comes to that, we're always looking for more ways when it comes to being a part in communities. When it comes to that, creating opportunities for meaningful dialogue with our administrators and tribal communities to create those two-way partnerships. Before I mentioned those one-way partnerships of where people come to NMSU, we educate and we go through that process and then we return them back. But how often do we talk to our tribal communities and see what it is that they need when it comes to some of the amazing research capacity that we have at our institution? And working with our tribal extension services in every single county here in the state of New Mexico, we can do a lot of good. And also visiting our tribal communities when it's safe, so that way our tribal leadership can meet with our NMSU leadership and create those opportunities for exchange when it comes to that thought process, cultural process, and just the overall betterment of the state of New Mexico. And now I bring up this question to you all, how will you learn about other cultures? We often talk about the very surface level when it comes to the Discovery Channel, when it comes about, food, dance, music, song is something that happens. But when it comes to that deeper level, when it comes to those familial relationships, when it comes to culture, when it comes to humor, how do we raise our young? How do we help our elders when it comes to that? That's the main thing that I would like more and more people to understand about cultures, because sometimes the dance, the song, what we see, what popular culture gives us isn't enough. So how will we learn about that going forward? But that was just a question for you all to ponder. But if there's any questions you have, here's my contact information with the American Indian Program, our website, our phone number over there at the university, and our email address. And this is definitely one of those times where we can pause when it comes to the YouTube video. But I want to definitely take this time to have those questions answered that we were talking about. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Mike, what's the major issue? I mean, the majors that Native Americans go into in their studies. The majors that they take up.
Okay, sure. We have students who will go into a variety of majors. We see students who will go into criminal justice. We'll see students who are going into government. We'll see students who will go into animal science, nursing, public health, engineering, business. So those are some of the primary So it's a broad range. We often see some who are looking when it comes to that experimental or experiential learning process as well. So we'll get the few who want to go into the bachelor's of individualized science to try and create something that they're looking at doing. We do sometimes get a couple that are going into anthropology who might want to go into preservation, museum curation, but this is being as a result that more and more tribal communities are looking at doing museums or historical knowledge curation.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, yeah, this is Dave Rice. Can you comment, as a person not familiar with some of the Indian cultures here in New Mexico, can you comment on the distinctions between the term pueblo and the term reservation, for example, to help me understand that?
Sure. Pueblo is pretty much almost like a style when it comes to the housing that people will utilize when it comes to that community living area. So if you look at the adobe, sometimes that'll be more when it comes to a Pueblo style of housing, more of that community cultural based living, kind of a similar to like the Navajo. The Navajo do not have as much of a cultural community living. They're more sparse. They are spread out amongst, but within their own communities as well. Sometimes you'll see people who will have, say, a fenced in area where maybe 3 or 4 different generations will live in different houses in that same area, but you won't have another neighbor for maybe 20 miles down the road. So that is still on a reservation, but it wouldn't necessarily be called a pueblo. So the reservation goes in towards that military term when it comes to in the United States was trying to create sectionized areas when it comes to this area that these individuals will be lived in, land assigned to and whatnot. But the pueblo would be more about their housing style or that style of living community.
Thank you.
Carla, you had a comment or question.
Yeah, comment. This was just so impressive, all the work you're doing at the center. I just want to commend you and really appreciate your coming and explaining everything that you do with the students and with the communities. It's just, really wonderful work.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is what we often want to do is create that time to share culture. I often talk about this with students because the more that we are able to understand cultures other than our own, the more opportunities can potentially arise. For those students who are looking at various jobs as they leave the university, sometimes they might not have ever thought about working in another country, but because they've been able to experience cultures of their own, maybe moving to another country who has a completely different culture from our own might not be as scary as they might thought of beforehand. Or for those individuals who are working with various communities not of their own, they may have that opportunity to work with community as opposed to just work at community. So when it comes to that, working with community, looking and talking to those individuals that are there to get that history of the community and what ways that are utilized when it comes to those, maybe if they're in nursing, those traditional ways of healing, those traditional ways of doing, and familial, like I was mentioned before, ties with elder care, how do you raise children and whatnot. I often bring this up when it comes to our students who are going into medicine. When it comes to the New York area, if you had a doctor who could say Jewish people can no longer use their traditional ways of healing, I'm sure there would be tons of people who would be outraged that they're not allowing matzo ball soup to be utilized as a cure for the common cold. But this is one of those things where we often don't think about that in that type of respect, is it's a cultural, traditional way of healing.
I have a question.
Yes, go
This is
ahead.
Rosa. Okay, actually there's a couple of questions. One is, do you happen to know how many men and women are actually Native Americans participating in your program?
Unfortunately, I haven't done the delineation between men and women, just the overall total number that I mentioned before of that 638. But then again, those are those who have self-identified. We do know that there are some students who have descendancy who still really don't understand that a little bit, because there is that difficulty when trying to say tribally enrolled. But for those who aren't able to tribally enroll due to whatever qualifications of that tribal community might be, sometimes will have their identity attacked when it comes to, well, you're not Native, you don't look Native, you don't, all these different things because of that, again, stereotype that has been given to us by popular culture of what a Native American should look like. Knowing that Native Americans come in all different facial types, all different eye colors, different hair colors, hair lengths. So this is where sometimes we work with our students to try and get that sense of, where do you come from? Where does your people come from? So for those who are looking at getting more information about their tribal community, this is where they may have to have that difficult conversation with their family of, what is our history? Because sometimes, being Native American wasn't always in fashion. It wasn't always the thing to do. There was that time during the termination era where people were told, you now have to go live in Los Angeles. You now have to go live in Chicago. You now have to go live away from your home communities. And that's part of that termination era policies when it comes to that forced cultural assimilation. So by losing that sense of history, losing that self-identity is ultimately what the plan was. And in some respects, it succeeded. But there's also that often process of getting to know one's own self. You see this a little bit more when it comes to the 23andMe, the Ancestry.com, all of these different things, where people are now wondering, whose people do I come from? What is the representation of me? You hear people who say, oh, I thought I was Irish, but it turns out I'm Dutch. Or you go through this process. And you've seen students who are like, I thought I was Apache, but no, we're Comanche, or we're these types of different things. So it's just like, as people are trying to get to know themselves as well, we have students who are trying to get to know themselves also.
Yeah, the second, thank you very much. The second question that I have is that, do you happen to know how many faculty or staff are actually American Indian there with the university?
Staff, I'm still trying to figure that out. I know we have about a handful when it comes to our Native American faculty, and even that can sometimes be, like we mentioned with the descendancy and whatever, that's still a little bit difficult, because there are some who may be Native American but don't put on there because they're not a federally or state recognized tribal community. Because we have Tortugas just right across from us in I-10, and we have a lot of faculty, a lot of staff members who are claiming Tortugas, but because they're not federally or state recognized, it's very hard to have them put that on there when it comes to the self-identification. But our main Native American faculty that we have is Dr. Jeanette Haynes-Ryder in the College of Education, Dr. Don Pepion in the College of Arts and Sciences and Anthropology, Dr. John Sandstrom's in the library, his acquisitions librarian, Dr. Georgina Bodoni when it comes to the Department of Anthropology, Dr. Brandon Hobson when it comes to the English department, and Dr. Casey McDougall when it comes to the Counseling Education Psychology program in the College of Education. And those are the ones that usually we meet, we talk to one another, but I'm sure there's other tribally affiliated individuals on our campus that just really haven't known just as of yet. But also we have quite a bit of international who come from South America, who come from various countries, who are also have that indigenous community, indigenous background, but we still just haven't had that opportunity to meet just as of yet.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking you is because I went through the border history program at UTEP, and it was my second master's, and I actually took some Native American classes, and I wanted a Native American professor in the history department to teach it, and they didn't have any. So in you listing the disciplines, I don't see that you have any in the history department.
Yeah, and I know like over at UNM, we have a gentleman who was in the history. His name is Lloyd Lee, Dr. Lloyd Lee, and he's a Navajo gentleman. His, I think, area is American history, but then switched over to Native American Indigenous history.
Okay, thank you.
So if that can give you any help of identifying names and connecting the dots, he would definitely be able to help out.
Yes,
Any
no, I
other
appreciate it.
questions from us? Anybody else? Go ahead,
Rosemary. Michael, this is Omer. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Program is doing. I think this is wonderful.
You're not coming through very well, Rosemary.
Oh yeah, you're not coming through very well.
Could you use her chat?
Yeah, you can probably use a chat function.
Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, during these COVID times, how are your student organizations like ACES and UNAO, and I believe there were one or two others, are they up and running? Are they interacting with the other students from the other departments for these specific student organizations?
They're trying. As much as Zoom fatigue has set in for some of our faculty, that is also coming in when it comes to our students as well. So they're trying to communicate with one another, whether it be email, chat, Facebook groups and whatnot. But we're looking forward to them coming together and try and create new and creative ways to still have that sense of community. I know one of the things that we brought up, students will often ask, what about the community service aspects when it comes to NMSU? How do we do some of that? And this is where we've been given a little bit of guidance of students maybe having a specific day where they say, okay, everyone's gonna go out and do 3 hours of community service in their home communities. That way they're still doing whatever they're looking at doing when it comes to that. Or maybe there might be a time where Zoom has been the normal when it comes to our elementary, middle school, and high schools, where if they would want to give a presentation to their home community, it makes it a little bit easier now because Zoom has become that common, where if we wanted to have students go and give a presentation to their local elementary, middle school, or high school, it may be a little bit more difficult of trying to get them back to their home communities. Say if they're from Farmington, that 8-hour drive one way to do a presentation for 30 minutes and then to come all the way back down may be a little bit more prohibitive. But this is where we're having that little creative talk of how can we utilize this distant but close relationship that Zoom has been giving us to our advantage. So we're really going to see what can they come up with. We often look to the younger ones of are they going to push the boundaries of technology and go into all these different realms.
Thank you. I just have one last question. You also said that you're looking at having your 10th anniversary for this building that you're in now. Mm-hmm. Is it actually, I guess, scheduled? You've got a date and the program is being developed?
Well, like I mentioned before, it's not going to be an in-person one.
Right.
Once we get to maybe next semester in the spring, we may have an open house when it comes to that. But when it comes to now, we're going to be looking at doing a kind of a history of the American Indian Student Center series on YouTube. So we're going to try and maybe do 2 or 3 different talks when it comes to the previous directors, when it comes to the people who were there, when it comes to the creation of the building and that meaningful impact that it's been creating for students. So we're going to have some of our alumni talk about what it was like being in the old building of Garcia Annex and then transitioning over to the new building of the American Indian Student Center and how that kind of gave them that little bit more sense of space when it comes to utilize. I remember being in Garcia Annex and my office was off to the side, being able to talk to students that much more freely because the lab was just right there. But now that we have our 2 buildings, it's a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to that student interaction that I'm doing. So it has its plus and its minuses. So this is one of those kind of conversations that we want to talk about and explore a little bit with our previous staff and our previous alumni.
So is this going to be done next semester then? Or do you have something planned for this semester?
The YouTube video should be coming out in October.
Okay.
The actual date of our opening ceremony was on October 10th, 2010. So we're hoping to introduce this around that time period. Okay. So in about less than a month, I'm looking at my calendar right now, we should be having something on YouTube talking about the history of the American Indian Student Center.
Great, thank you.
Sure thing.
Any other questions or comments?
I had a question about are there other institutes like this one at like New Mexico University or other state institutions? And the second part of that is, you mentioned early on the State Indian Affairs Committee. Now, is that something that you work with in the sense of a presence of the Native American community in the state writ large?
Okay, let me go with the first one. UNM has what's called American Indian Student Services, and they're a part of the program. Unfortunately, they don't have their own building, so that's one of the ones that they do. New Mexico Tech has a small group when it comes to that, so they don't have like a large department like we do or that UNM does. New Mexico Highlands has an office over there as well. San Juan College has its Native American program as well. Eastern New Mexico University has a smaller one as well. Western New Mexico University has one that's attached to the Metra building over there. Northern New Mexico University or Northern New Mexico College also has a small program that has helped out with a couple of different things. But when it comes to other institutions, we are one of the few that have their own building. I know NAU over there in Flagstaff has their own building.
Yeah,
The
yes.
Native American program at the University of Montana has a beautiful 2-story building that is right in that big oval in their campus. But this is just one of the things that we're glad to have at our institution, because in working with our Native American legislators, that's where the GEO bonds came on through. There was very small amounts of NMSU money that actually came into the creation of the Native American Indian Student Center on our campus. And that's where we've historically worked with our Native American legislators to let them know what's going on, how our students are being served. But also when it comes to the Indian Affairs Committee, we try and keep that communication going, because we often look to help out when it comes to some of the initiatives that are coming through the state of New Mexico on the higher education platform. I just recently had a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Nathan Moquino. He is the New Mexico HED tribal liaison. So we were talking about some of the things on how our institution works with our tribal communities. And he was very happy to hear how much involvement we have with our tribal education departments. But not only that, when it comes to the Native American language ability, when it comes to those certain programs that we have on our campus that have a second language requirement, and how students are able to utilize their traditional language to get that taken care of, but not necessarily the credit requirements. Because of course, 120 hours, 124 hours, whatever the degree requires is still needed, but at least the language requirement would be fulfilled with their traditional languages. So we work with the tribal communities, we work with our state agencies to, again, try and create a more, holistic view and holistic way of approach. Because when it comes to our students who may be looking at going into the government, they will be working with those departments as well. And when it comes to that whole interaction, when it comes to the state looking at our tribal communities, when it comes to, well, where are your students going? Are they staying in the state? How can we continue to create more jobs, more infrastructure, more process for the state of New Mexico? We can hope to help out when it comes to that, with creating opportunities for businesses, creating opportunities for more jobs that are available in our state.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Judy.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Michael. I just wanted to mention the wonderful Art Institute in Santa Fe, American Indian Art
Yeah.
Institute. I don't know if that's part of a educational thing, but there's certainly, it's a fabulous facility. I've gone to conferences there. So I'm assuming that it's a wonderful way for, to promote Native American art. And
Definitely, we work with them quite well as well when it comes to they're a part of the 1996 land grant institutions that were brought into the
Okay.
Land Grant Institute. So them and Southwestern Polytechnical Institute are part of that when it comes to our state of New Mexico. But like Haskell, they're a part of the congressionally funded higher education programs, kind of similar with our Naval Academy, our military academies. They're a part of where that funding comes through. So we're able to work with them when it comes to transfer opportunities for students. We see sometimes our students who are doing their undergraduate will go for master's programs at IAIA, but sometimes, we've had some really great students who have done that. I don't know if any of you all know Teresa Maya. She is the author of the book Heartberries, which has her memoirs of her time here at New Mexico State University, and then transitioning to her master's and PhD program at IAI.
What was the title of the book?
Heartberries?
Heartberry. Thank you. Michael, I have one last question. Several weeks ago, we had a young lady who also gave us a presentation from New Mexico State. She was with the IRD program.
Okay.
Can you explain the distinction and how you all collaborate?
Sure. Yeah, the IRD is an RPSP through the state of New Mexico that is housed at New Mexico State University. So they are more primarily towards getting Native American students to the university and out into the careers of business, engineering, and agriculture. So that is their primary focus when it comes to those areas. So they'll create the strategic opportunities when it comes to NAPI. There's something that might have come up through their NAPI Scholars Program, or through the Arrowhead Center when it comes to their Indigenous incubator that they're working on starting up. So that's where that is RPSP money from the state of New Mexico through the New Mexico legislature to fund that program, and it's housed here at New Mexico State University. So they work with UNM, they work with New Mexico Tech, and they work with us to try and help out when it comes to creating these collaborative ideas and collaborative programs. But we're an entity that's completely of New Mexico State University.
Right.
The difference is that they're housed here, and we're New Mexico State University's investment in Native American communities.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Ray, are you familiar with the U of A, the program there in the museum there?
The which one?
U of A, University of Arizona in Tucson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We have some students who have gone that route as well. We've had a student who's gone through medical school over there. They have a great program. The law school, we've had one of the professors from the law school come out and give a presentation at our institution as well.
I just want to let you know that when I moved to Tucson, the first place that I went to was to the museum. And it's free, open on Saturdays and Sundays all day. And every person that will come to visit me, I will take them there. I hope that in the future, you're able to have a museum like that here, because it would really assist on educating anybody here and the people that are coming about the multiple tribes that are here. Yeah.
Yeah, right now that's taken on by the University Anthropology Museum over in Kent Hall. So Dr. Fumi Arikawa has been working a lot when it comes to the pottery that's being displayed there at the university. He's also worked with some of our contemporary artists when it comes to the different mediums that are available. So definitely, if you ever have the chance, check out the University Anthropology Museum as well, because they've been doing some amazing stuff, and they bring speakers onto our campus as well from all over the country.
Thank you.
Is that open for visitors now?
You know what? I am not too sure. I would definitely check their website and give them a call first, because I'm not too sure what's going on in that area.
Okay.
Great.
All right. So we have about 2 minutes left before this session is over. Does anyone have any more questions?
Anyone have more questions, comments?
Yeah, I have one. I went, it was way back in the early 80s to mid 80s. The community college had a series of talks from Native American students that went to school at NMSU about their cultures that you could just go to and learn more about it. And that kind of helped, certainly me, being a German citizen and just moved here. Is anything like that still going on? Because I haven't read anything about that.
Okay. Usually where we have that opportunity is in April. We call it American Indian Week. And it's where the students get the opportunity to flip the role of instructor on the university. The university will always have an anthropology course, a history course, a sociology course. We'll say, this is who Native Americans were, this is what they did. But this is a time where students get to bring presenters, they get to do panel presentations themselves and talk about this is who we are, this is who we still are doing, and this is what we're going to be doing in the future, of flipping that role when it comes to not necessarily looking at Native Americans in the past, but what Native Americans are doing currently and what Native Americans will be doing in the future. So that is something that students will be looking at, hopefully bringing more people onto campus again when it comes to that time where we're able to do so. But we're also thinking about, again, how can we incorporate the distance when it comes to either YouTube, Facebook Live, or Zoom to create that larger community? Because we know not everybody can come to our campus, especially for our students who are at DACC, NMSU Grants, NMSU Carlsbad, NMSU Magordo, or our NMSU online students. But this may be that time where we're able to get that community that much larger and get that word out that much more.
Let's give Michael a big hand. Thank you very much, Michael. And I just want to announce that Walt Rubel will be our speaker next Sunday at 2 o'clock. And he'll be talking about how do you report on a political campaign that we're going to have this time, and we have already. And so he'll give us insights on how he'll be handling the political campaign this next 2 months.
Great.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank
And
you very
Rodney,
much.
Thank you,
Rodney,
Michael.
that was a heck of a game, wasn't it?
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. See you next week. And thank you again, Michael Ray, for coming on. We really appreciated the talk.
Sure thing. You all have a great day.
Sarah. Thank you,
Have a
Sarah.
great
Bye-bye.
day, everyone.